All right, hi everyone who may be watching this now or after the fact. Hopefully technology works for us. We're here with Cintia Del Rio, who is in Australia uh, and is going to tell us, basically walk us through the work that we did to set up better CI and release processes for OpenMRS as we were releasing OpenMRS 2.1. And basically being able to release modules with one click through Bamboo and have as well have modules be able to sort of share versions of dependencies and things like that. So without any further ado, I'll let her go ahead and uh, tell us about it.
Alright. So the way I kind of thought about this talk is that I'm going to explain what we did. If we have a little bit of time, I probably I will explain the kind of problems that can hit and how to investigate and how to fix it. And I'm going to explain how it is right now, but I guess in a week or two and sometime it will change. And I really would like all those to understand and start contributing to it. And it'll be, I really don't want to be the only person that owns the process. It's everyone's process, and I really want all those to deal with. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. There are a few links. I put most of the links that I'm going to talk about on the event page, so you don't really have to search in here. It should be all on the event. So let me enable it here. Okay, so Um, so if you go, this is ci.openmrs.org. So every time that you see some icon like this small little ball in here, it's a release build. It's a build that is stopped on a manual build, on a manual state. So let me give like an example. Here you have here allergy API. So there is the normal Maven release, Maven verify, and there is a stage in here called release, and it's waiting for someone to come in here and click on the run stage. So you have a lot of different ones. You can see I did this work for, I guess, 12 different modules, and we can set up for any other module that we want. And so there is one specific module that I use a lot to test anything. So if you go, there is a release test module. Every time I'm going to try anything new, you can just go in here and run this. It does a full release of this module. This module is on GitHub as well. So if you go module release test, it's a normal dummy test I just created for us in order to test the releases. So if you really want to know, let's see if it works, you can just go in here and do it. So there is a page. So every time I set up a release plan, there is a link in here, more details of the release, on the very beginning of the description, on the end of the plan. So this page is this one here. There's a lot of print screens saying exactly how you can release and what are the options and what can you do and all those things. So every time you have any questions, you can jump into this page and understand what option do you have on the release. So I'm going to give you a release in here. So you click in here, you have this page that you can override variables. You can override some variables, the next version, the next snapshot version, or the current version that is going to be released. But you can actually run the default. So you can just say, hey, run. What this build is actually doing. I'm going to show you step by step. but it's calling the Maven release plugin. It's the release prepare, release perform. So it's exactly what is executing in here. The difference is that you're not running from your machine, you're running from a Bamboo agent, which is it's more consistent and all the things. It doesn't matter what you install in your local box. It's always the same on Bamboo. Um, and the release plugin, the way it works is that the release plugin, it already picks some defaults. If you do not pass any value, it reads the POM file, and the release version is based on what you have in your POM file without the snapshot. And the next version is just bumps the last number. So by default, it just runs the release with pretty much the default configuration. So if you don't really want the next version, the release version, to be what you already had on your POM file, you can customize it. So it's still running in here, so I cannot show in here, but I can show in here probably. So in here, when you run, I'm not going to release this, okay? But when you run here, Maven release version, if you say, oh, by default, if I just run in here, it's going to release version 1.1 of Allergy API. But let's say I did not want to release 1.1. I want to release 2.0. So what you do is 2.0, and then you run. You do not need to specify both. If you specify 2.0 in here, the next snapshot will be 2.1 snapshot. So it should be all fine. So here it went green, and if you see on the logs, it did everything. It uploaded the artifacts to Maven, it created a tag and everything like that. So let me show you exactly what this build is doing. So I click E for editing, or you can just go in Actions, Configure. This is a manual stage. How did I create this manual stage? It's very simple. If you go to Plan Configuration and you click on when you're creating the stages, you can say, hey, I want to create this stage to be manual. So that's all you need to do. If you do manual, Bamboo will stop and will wait for you to actually hit the button in order to continue. So the release job, it's not very, it looks very complicated, but it's very simple. It does a checkout of your repo. It calls iScript. I'm going to show you right now what this script do. So let me see, where is it? Yeah. So all the scripts that I'm using for the release are in this repo, country Bamboo. So we can see in here that it's calling the release prepare perform. I did in bash, but it could be anything that you want and you have on the Bamboo agent. So it could be bash, it could be Python. I don't know if we have Python installed, but I chose to run bash because for me it's simple. So the release prepare perform this script, it does a little bit of verifying that all the arguments were passed and everything, but pretty much what it does, it takes the release version, that's the Bamboo variable. What is a Bamboo variable? Where that value is defined. So what is the next version that is going to be released is here. If you go in variables, it will see that those arguments that I could customize it are actually here. So I do have the next release version, and I do have Maven development version that is actually empty. So those are the values that you could override when running customizer. So coming here, so I do receive by when I call the task, I'm passing these bamboo variables as arguments to the script. So you come in here, so you see, oh, you're passing a bamboo variable that is actually called Maven release version. This is and everything like that. So I'm creating a temporary folder to the Maven local repo just to make sure I'm not spoiling the current Maven local repo of the agent. So I'm making sure that when we are doing a release, we are using a brand new temporary Maven local repo instead of the home M2 repository folder. And I'm just calling Maven release prepare, release perform with these arguments that we are passing here. Dash B is just to make sure, is just to make sure that it's not showing all the downloads, the percent, how many bytes, it's just a batch mode. But it should work very similar to what you have when you run it locally. Next task, I'm just doing a few things with Bamboo variables. So I'm actually reading, after I do the release, prepare, perform, I'm reading the POM file to retrieve what is the next release version. I'm just reading the POM file and removing the snapshot. And then I'm taking what will be the next development version from the POM file without removing the snapshot. And this one I'm saving on Bamboo configuration. This one I'm just retrieving to use on the next task. If you have any problem to understand how this scope works, the Bamboo scope of variables work, there is some explanation in here. And Bamboo 5.7 will have a much better way, another scope that will be much better to handle this kind of variable. And so the last script that I have in here is distro update. So it's pretty much the same. It has a few arguments. What is the release version? What is the next development version? And it passes distro property. So what does it do? Let's come back to the same repository. So the name of this is distro update. So we come here.
Before you go through what it does, maybe we can talk about why. I think just sort of some context setting. So, we are going right now. We're thinking that we've set up a Bamboo plan to release a. So we've set up a Bamboo plan to release a module that is part of the reference application. And
Yeah.
so one thing that happens is the reference application itself is defined in the OpenMRS distro reference application Maven project, or well, Git repository. And that includes basically versions of all of the different modules that the distribution includes in its pom.xml file.
Yeah.
So so that probably right now says, if you were to look at it right now, it would say that the version of the allergy API module that is included is 1.1 snapshot. So now, let's say we've actually gone through and clicked that we want to release allergy API 1.1. In addition to publishing that to Maven, sort of building the release artifact and publishing the released artifact to Maven, we also need to update the OpenMRS reference application distributions POM file to say, basically, we've got a new released version. And so that is what we'll go through now.
Okay. So let me share screen again. Okay. So this is the reference application, exactly the POM file. So you see every version, every module or the modules that belong, that are part of the reference application are in here, and each one has a property. So after you do the release, you want to bump the version in here. It depends of which part of the release process, how close you are to the releasing the reference application. Sometimes you want to bump to the next release version, so you just release, let's say, allergy API 1.1, and you want to put 1.1 in here, or you want to put actually 1.2 snapshot, and you do not want to do it manually. So that's why we have the script that is in here. So what it does a git clone of this repo, the distribution repo, this repo. It's pretty much just that, a git clone. And this variable, what is the URL of this repo is actually a global Bamboo variable. So if it's not a plain variable, if you go here in Bamboo variables, you could actually see what is the URL configure to do that. So it's in there. See the repo in there. So it's a lot of customization is done by global variables and plain variables. So if you really see a dollar bamboo something, it's a bamboo variable that you have to to get. It does a git clone. It changes to this new cloned repo. I do a git config to make sure I'm pushing. If I do a commit in here, I'm just pushing the current branch. I check out the branch that I want to. By default, everything goes to master. It's a global variable in here. The only thing that doesn't go to master is actually the test plan, the test module, because I really don't want to, every time I do a test release in here, I'm updating the master of reference application. It doesn't make sense. But as I want to test if I'm committing properly, I do have a branch up here that I'm pushing. The important thing about Bamboo variables is the kind of variety value. So if you do have a global one and you have a plan with the same name, the value that you're going to receive is the plan one. So that's all good and fine. What I do in here, so there is a, if you go to the plan and you go to the variables again, there is, what is the name of the property that you're going to change on the on your reference application. So this is type about, of course, if you have a module that do not upload, is not part of reference application, you do not need this task of these steps, but we have quite a lot, and all I did were part of this. So you have the property in here. So it's going to look for a property called, this is a very test thing. It's called report UI version. If you go to allergy UI, it's allergy UI version. It's going to do a grab to see if it's there or not and fail first before doing anything else. It's doing a set in here. So it's replacing whatever you had in there before by the new value. So the new value, if it's going to be the release variable, or the next, if it was, let's say, 1.1, or if it's 1.2 snapshot, it depends of a global variable. So there is a global variable saying if you are preparing a reference application distribution, you really want the release version. If you're not, you want the next snapshot. Here. So it changes the value of the variable using a set. It does a very simple git add and git commit. And at the end, it does a git push. So the thing is that I'm doing. It's important to put a very important commit message that you can actually understand what is coming. There is one user configure to everything that you commit from the Bamboo agent is going to be using the same user. If you do a release, if it's committed by the Maven release or if it's committed by iScript, it doesn't matter. It's the same user that we have in GitHub. It's a bot account only for Bamboo. And when we are actually deploying a snapshot, when we're saying to including a snapshot on the distro, I do a deploy of the current snapshot. Otherwise, I'm going to change the distro to the next snapshot. So Bamboo will detect that there is a new commit, but this snapshot is not yet deployed. So to avoid that, I'm deploying here straight away, skipping the task. It was just after the release, so there was no other chance. We are just deploying the next snapshot to not fail the distribution.
Let me just comment on that one last bit that we were seeing there. There perhaps is a better way to do this, but we ended up basically setting up a global variable which represents at a global level in Bamboo whether we are in the process of releasing the distribution itself or not. And if we are in, the idea basically being that if we're in the process of releasing the distribution, then anytime we release one of the individual modules, we then update the distribution to just include that newly released version. Whereas if we are not in the middle of releasing the distribution, like let's say we're not planning to release OpenMRS 2.2 until March, if one releases the next version of the allergy API module, we would then update the distribution to just include the next snapshot because we assume that between now and next March, there's going to be another release. So you want to be sort of using the latest versions you want to be using the latest versions versus if we're actively going through and trying to release 30 different modules to release the distribution, we have that global variable that just means that each time you release one, you only set the distribution to include that released version.
So,
back to you.
okay, I'm starting to share my screen again. So, we have quite a lot of different modules that we are already using this type of release. So, if you're interested in have another module on this Bamboo server, you can come in here. There is a page called Configure a plan to release from Bamboo. So you can follow the steps in here on your module. So as far as you're on the same Bamboo, it should work fine. So it includes changing the SCM tag to SSH, because the way it works is that the release plugin always use the SCM tag. It doesn't matter how you actually ship out the code. It uses the SCM tag. And we need SSH in order to be automated, in order to not require username and password. You have instead SSH key. Make sure the distribution manager works fine. There might be some configuration that you need to do on the release plugin itself. And this one I'm going to explain in a little bit. So there is here an explanation about how to create a new release stage from a very new build with a few screenshots. And there is here, if the build already exists, how you should do. So if you're creating a brand new plan, you can just come to this plan and clone this one, and should just change a few things that you have to do. I think I had one module that did this way, and it was quite easy. So when I was saying that there was one step in here. So what we did as well, so what I explained is how to do with this prepare perform from Bamboo. What we need to do in order to achieve that, we had to configure the Git credentials with SSH key, SSH configuration, and Git config. And we had to make sure that the settings files, the Maven settings files, had deploy access. I'm going to create a very much bigger blog post only about that. So it's probably going to be in 2 weeks' time. It should be published. So if you're actually planning on doing your Bamboo server, you can use that as a reference, but I'm happy to help as well. So there is other thing that we did is that there is a lot of dependency between the modules. So you have one module that actually depends on a lot of others. So when you're going to release, I think, MR API, for example, you release a new version. So you'd have to go on each module that we're using that as a dependency and change the version there as well to point to the latest release. To try to improve that situation, we came with this. We started using the import scope for the POM file. So we are importing the release application POM file, the top level POM file, and that's important to understand that the import scope. It's not when you do that. There is a
So,
link
all right,
on
before
it.
you get in there, let me sort of just back up a step.
Yep.
Um, the so the reference application is made up of a whole bunch of modules, 30 plus of them. Some of those modules are sort of common OpenMRS functionality that also is largely broadly used outside of the reference application. I mean, you'll find things like the HTML form entry module, the IDGen module. There's sort of things in there that don't really, I mean, they're in the reference application, but they don't belong to it. And so that's one set of things. But we also have a bunch of modules that pretty much sort of they belong to the reference application and they're not used, or at least haven't been used really outside of them. And we're not really interested in supporting the idea, or I mean, we're not particularly trying to support the idea that you could use these things without the rest of the reference application. So like EMR API, I think is one of them. The core apps module is one of them. I think some of the the allergy API module is sort of its own thing, but the allergy UI module is implemented as something that's just sort of part of the reference application. And so the benefit, I mean, the reason of making these things sort of part of the reference application is that basically you just say they're going to inherit all dependency versions, they will inherit them from the reference application itself. So if we're saying, all right, we're moving the reference application up to use the next version of EMR API, we're like releasing EMR API 1.4, and now the reference application is going to start using EMR API 1.5 snapshot. We would like it to, that same dependency to magically be cascaded to 10 other things like allergy UI, reporting UI, HTML form entry UI, I mean, core apps, a bunch of other things. And so, so this is how we did that.
So the thing, so how we did was using the import scope. So the parent POM of the reference application is deployed on every rebuild, actually a little bit before that, on every commit and every triggered build from the distribution. And this build, the reference application distribution build, it's actually just deploying the parent POM in here. And the way, let me get in this page again, is that we are doing an import of the POM. There is a link about this on the links that I put in there, explaining a little bit what is the difference between just importing a POM file and using import scope. But it's it's important to understand that when you do that, you're not including dependencies, you're not including plugin executions, you're not including properties, you're just including the dependency management. Just which version of of dependencies you're going to be using. So if you define a dependency, the version could come from this import. That's all you're defining. So it's different of a parent home. And one thing that's different, it actually allows us to define is as properties. So there is actually the possibility of, let's say you want to build, you have this module that actually works with this version of reference application. But let's say that you want to change to use the next version, the previous version of the reference application, or could even test the dependency management from all the distributions if you really want by command line. So you could define, let's say, Maven verify and pass distributed group ID and just all these three properties by command line with dash D on each one. And you could run modifying on this run of Maven, you could modify what are the versions based on what you have on the POM file of your distribution. And we did this for a few modules. And if you want to know which ones on this repo, on the contrib repo, there is a file in here showing exactly which ones have the what you call the import of the reference application. So every time you modify something on the reference application on, all these modules should pick the new versions of the dependencies they are using. So if you don't have, they do not define versions of dependencies of OpenMRS anymore. They just use the versions that come from the reference application to run the tests and everything. And what do we do on the other side? And this is probably something that I'm going to be working on the next weeks, is that when you release a new version of the distribution application, so let me come in here. So this is the distribution application plan. It does a few tests, it deploys to a server, run UI tests, and it actually has a manual step as well to release. So the thing is, this first is a manual one, so Bamboo will stop exactly in here. So it will be waiting for someone to hit the release button. And the other stages will run after the release goes green. So the release to Maven, it's exactly the same thing that I've already explained before. It's a release prepared performed, nothing really fancy. I just deploy a snapshot version of the parent home, and I save the variable, what is the next. But there is, when I finish releasing the distribution, there is a script that is called this one. There is called update reference this version. So if I come in here on the contrib, what this script does, it gets the file that I showed before that has a list of all the repos that are using the import scope of the reference application. It does a git clone of each one of those. Same thing, it changes to a different the clone folder. It configure what is the, the push, what is it, just commit the current branch. it does a set replacing that property that say, what is the property that is, yeah, it's this one, distro.version. That's the property that is going to change. And it pushes the commit. And at the very end, it just says if it was successful, which there was any errors and things like that. And this is a very, if you're going to start, if anything that you can do by command line, you can do in Bamboo. So if you do, if any script, any git command, anything that you can think that you do already on your local machine, it can be run from Bamboo, and it already has the Git credentials, so it's always just a matter of if you have a user, you can run it. And I just, as the last step, I just changed, do you remember that variable that we say, hey, should you release a new, the snapshot, should you put the snapshot or the next or the release version on the reference application after you release a module? So I'm just making sure it's saving to false by the end of the release, so you do not have to remember to put it to false. Um, Anything you want to comment, Doris?
No, I think that this is, well, first off, this is great. It's done, really improved the process a ton. I'm going to say that when we released OpenMRS 2.0, it basically it basically stopped us at PIH from being able to get any work done for like a week, because we spent the whole week updating module dependencies that were sort of not being done automatically. And basically, with this release of OpenMRS 2.1, that didn't happen at all. I mean, releasing a new version of any of the modules is just a click, and so that's been great. One thing that there's one particular thing we discovered that I think we still need to figure out how to solve, or maybe, Cynthia, you already know the solution here. But so as we've shifted these modules to import the instead of declaring OpenMRS versions of OpenMRS modules that they depend on themselves, they import those from the POM of the distribution. There's one issue that has come up, which is that those version dependencies don't only get used for Maven to download, for Maven to actually figure out the dependencies. Sorry, the variables that we used to always declare at the top of every pom.xml file for a module. They don't just get used for Maven dependency versions, but they also get substituted into the config.xml file for that module. So for example, if the reporting UI module depends, or yeah, sure, if the reference application module depends on the EMR or depends on the IDGen module, and it depends on version 2.7 of that, then that used to be declared in a variable in the Bamboo in the pom.xml for the reference application, and the config.xml file would get that substituted in for the module dependency. But that's actually not happening anymore, and we sort of didn't quite realize that, except we didn't realize it till after the fact, because OpenMRS doesn't complain when this happens. But so all of the modules that we released for OpenMRS 2.1, if you look in their config.xmls, they'll actually say like require module version equals, and then instead of a number, it'll be $ some variable name that never got substituted. And it hasn't, it didn't break anything. It just means that occasionally, I suppose, OpenMRS won't stop you from, if you were to install these things manually, OpenMRS won't stop you from trying to start in the wrong state. But we need to figure out how to address that.
And the other problem was the one that Rafael discovered, that when we release the reference application, the other modules are depending on a snapshot of the import, and it's not picking up. So the two problems that we discover, and we have to sort it out soon.
Uh, is the solution to that one, though, just that you need to sort of run one more build?
Uh,
Or was that the workaround?
yeah, it's the workaround for now, but we have to find a better. I've thought about some, but we discussed other day. So the last topic that I'd like to talk is the release plugin, because it looks very simple when you, oh yeah, it just does a release, but it's very complicated to configure it. And you're just right now running it from Bamboo, but it doesn't make it any simpler to understand why is it failing. It's the difference that it's failing all the like in Bamboo consistently instead of failing your machine because you haven't set the right credentials. So the thing, I put the link. Let me get to. So every time that you're actually going to change anything on the release configuration, make sure that you go to the plugin. Let me share my screen again because I forgot. There you go. So every time that you're going to configure anything on the on the release plugin configuration, just jump up, put on Google, Maven release plugin, and really read the documentation. There are a lot, heaps of different options. If you come in here, each argument, each option gives you a completely different thing. So there is here, I have it open for the release. And yeah, that's, but if you go in goals, you can have all of them. Then you can go to the perform. It's very important to understand that the release plugin, it works in two different Maven invocations. So you have the prepare. The first thing that you run, it will go and change the version of. Now, if you have profiles that enable different modules, you might have to go and say to we call the outer Maven, you enable this profile or you enable this. If you have a property that enable a profile, you have to pause as an argument like -p, -d normally. Um, After it goes and changes the version of on each of the modules that you have, it will call in a Maven. So that's why you have two infos showing on the logs, is that it's a Maven invocation calling another Maven invocation. The important part about this is that these inner Maven do not receive the same arguments as the outer Maven. So if you need to pass a profile to the inner Maven, or if you need to pass an argument to the inner Maven, make sure to pass these arguments. That's the thing. Sometimes you need to pass, let's say you have a -d that's supposed to need to work on the outer Maven and the inner Maven. You have to pass -d, what in your argument, -d arguments, your whatever you need. So instead of passing by command line the arguments, you can actually configure on the release plugin. So if you go here, you already have the how do you configure. So you put on the plugin management. It'll be another configuration here. It'll be arguments. If you need to pass any argument to the inner Maven, you put it here. And
Perhaps we should talk about why we have allow timestamp snapshots there.
yeah, I'm going to. That's the next thing. And the thing is, why do we have, so you see here on the configuration, you have allow snapshot, timestamp snapshot. The reason is when I do the import from the reference application, I might have all the modules that this module depends on that are on a snapshot. So it's the same. You might already has the, if you run by command line release prepare, you have to pass -d ignore snapshots. It's I don't know why they decided to do the config different from the property, but it's the same. It's a configuration of the release prepare to allow dependencies to be snapshots.
And to be explicit about why we need that, so because we now have some modules the um, import the reference application distribution for its versions, you know, at almost every time, that distribution is going to have some snapshots still in it, basically up until the moment when we manage to finally release a version with 30 plus non-snapshot dependencies on modules. While we're releasing 15 of those modules, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10 of them are going to have snapshot versions still. And
It's
so,
not, sorry.
all right, so I think the problem we were running into, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that, so basically, I mean, we need to release the modules in some order, but there's always going to be like we could never release them in a good enough order that there would never still be any snapshot dependencies in the things we're releasing. And it's sort of non-ideal in that the things we do release sometimes now have snapshot dependencies, but we couldn't figure out a way around it.
So
And
sorry, the thing is, it doesn't matter if a snapshot dependency, if there is a snapshot on the reference application, if we are not using as a dependency. So let's say that all the dependencies that I have of this module are not a snapshot. So the release would just work even without that configuration. But if there is a dependency that we are using, then it would fail. Yeah. Again, correct.
so does anybody else have any questions about what we've done, what the next steps are? Apparently, if you're watching on YouTube, you can also ask questions, although I have no idea how that works.
Okay, so let's see if someone comes with a question soon. In the meantime, I'm going to just keep talking. And after there is the inner maven. So by default, before when it changed the version, it runs a maven verify. There is an argument if you really want to change that, and it runs a maven verify. So it runs all the tests. When it finishes, it creates the commit, it pushes a tag, and it pushes everything to the SCM that you defined. All the commits will go to the current branch that you're running right now. And so and then the release prepare finishes. And it leaves a few temporary files, but that should be all right. The next thing that we call is the release perform. It has the same thing, inner maven, outer maven, and inner maven. The outer maven goes to the reads the temporary files. By default, it goes to the repo, so it's on GitHub. It checkouts everything that you have. It's in here. So it checkouts everything. Checkouts that tag that you created, and let me come here. Yeah. Check out the tag that you created, and then what it will call is actually a Maven deploy. It could be a deploy site as well, but unless if you have a report section, it's explaining on the page on when it's going to be deployed, when it's not going to be deployed. If you need a profile, you might need to enable on the outer Maven, on the inner Maven, the same way with the arguments. And by default, it as well, it enables, there is a property to say, I want to run use release profile. By default, it's true. What it does, it it actually calls what is the name of it just calls the deploy with this property enabled, perform release. So what it does, this is the super POM. So all the POM files use inherit from the super POM. So this guy is responsible for running the Java doc, doing some configuration of the deploy plugin, and running the source plugin. So the Java doc and the source plugin will only run during the release perform. That happens after you already create tag and everything. And at the very end, so it runs a deploy on each of the modules. So there might, if let's say the second mod fails for any reason, the first module was already deployed to Nexus or Maven Remote. And sometimes it's kind of annoying, but yes, it's important. If you already deploy something, if the release perform already start deploying any file, you pretty much have to start over again. You have to pick a new version and release it, a new version. It's usually just easier. And there is a few things is that you can, the release prepare will only work from the head of your branch. So you have to be on the last commit of the branch in order to run the release prepare. That's the way it was designed. There is a goal on the release plugin that's called release rollback, but it's kind of doesn't work most of the time the way you want because it does not delete the tag. So even if you do a release rollback because a release, let's say if a release install worked and the release perform you could not run for any reason, the release rollback does half of the job of cleaning the release prepare. So that's why I didn't include on the script. I think it just doesn't help really. And
For a couple of modules, we did have releases fail while releasing OpenMRS 2.1, and you'll notice that I may have then gone back and released a couple of things as version 1.9.0.1 or whatever it may be. So it happened a few times, and yes, version numbers don't matter so much. If you lose one and release the next minor or maintenance version, it's okay.
Yeah. And so that's the thing. It's just a number. Just burn another number, and it's usually much easier. And well, if you when you're handling with the release plugin, it's usually much easier. The way I create it is just much easier to configure everything on the POM file instead of passing arguments. So if you have anything you want, any property, just create a profile and say this is a profile that I want to enable. The release plugin has heaps of documentation, configurations for releases and arguments and everything that you can think. I guess that's pretty much how so if it fails, look at the logs. It's helpful as it can be, and yeah. Any questions that arrival?
It doesn't seem like anyone has any questions. I think the description of everything was so amazing, and also the wiki page exists and has everything documented already. So
Yeah, it's.
I have a quick question.
Yep.
And maybe this is you've already covered, or it might be a naive question, but if there's a module that's part of the reference application, let's say like HTML form entry, and it's being built as part of this process, is this process like what's part of the app built? Is that the same process by which HTML form entry, that module that also lives independent of the reference application, is using the same plumbing to to do its own CI?
I'm not sure I understand. I guess I'm missing a lot of context.
I think the so any of the modules that we configured it. I mean, taking HTML form entry as an example, we configured it to be able to be released through this mechanism, but it's not actually one of the ones that sort of belongs to the reference application, although it's included in the reference application. In the case of HTML form entry, again, we did set it up so that when Mark was going to release it, he pressed the button in Bamboo and it worked. The one thing that the Bamboo process doesn't do yet is it releases the compiled OMOD file to Maven, to the Maven repository, to sort of mavenrepo.openmrs.org, but it doesn't actually upload that to the module repository yet. So that's still a manual step, and I mean something we've talked about automating, and I guess Cynthia's been thinking about how to do it with a REST call out from Bamboo to the modules.openmrs.org. But the sort of the artifact, the OMOD file that would be in the reference application, and the one that you would use if you're sort of running OpenMRS without just OpenMRS platform, without the full reference application, it's the same thing. Is that what you were asking, Burke?
Yeah, I was just wondering, for those modules that are going to be distributed, are we saying that this becomes their process for, releasing as well? It seems, rather than saying, okay, well, we have a process where things get built and released for the reference application, and there's also another Bamboo plan somewhere else there that's being used for the official release of that module.
No, I think it's the same. It's one release. It's just that release gets included and can be used in more than one place. And I mean the HTML form entry build for the reference application is just one HTML form entry build. So Mario asked a question on the event page that is kind of related to this, and I guess I'll read it aloud. How does it work? How does it work if there's a module that's being used by different distributions? For example, EMR API module is being used by PIH in Mirabale and in Bomni by ThoughtWorks as well. And so do they still need to update their distros manually? And so that's a good question. And the answer to that is yes, they do still have to do things manually. So up until this point, we've basically just focused on at least getting the reference application distribution to work automatically, and when new releases happen, they get put in there. I think I've had in mind that if you are building a distribution and you want to in some way basically register the fact that you have a distribution that also needs to get version numbers updated when things are released, we should sort of support that, and we can, the same script that checks out the reference application distro and edits the pom.xml and checks it back in, we could apply that same script to PIH Mirabale distribution or to the ThoughtWorks Bomni distribution. But we haven't at least I assume we could do that in the future.
Yeah. Go ahead, Cynthia.
So if, let's say that the user had write access, the same user that I have on GitHub had write access, or if it's not GitHub or anything like that, that it would be just one or two lines in the script, if it's possible. I just don't know where this code is. But yeah.
Yeah, I think in general, as far as the OpenMRS community is not necessarily responsible for releasing all, these like the Kenya EMR distribution or the Omni distribution or PIH's distribution, but supporting like GitHub has the hooks where you can get notified that, hey, we've just done a new release, will allow one of those other teams to fire off a build based on the new, what was done for the reference application. That's what you're saying, Darius?
I mean, yeah, I'm just suggesting that if these other distributions, PIH and ThoughtWorks in this case, want to basically register to get called back by us when we do a release, they should be able to. And I mean, I would say they can get even more than just a ping. I mean, if it's easy enough, and they want to give us write access to their, like, to the OpenMRS bot, write access to their GitHub repos, and they want us to run the same script that checks out a file, changes one line, and recommits it, we can. That seems easy enough for us to do also. But I agree, it's mostly. I mean, we're not saying like we're going to take on as OpenMRS ownership of these other distributions as well. Rather, if they want to get called back.
Yeah, it's, I mean, whether it's like a GitHub hook where they get a ping, or it's like Jenkins or something like that where you provide some configuration stuff and we'll run a process. I think I agree. Like either of those approaches or both is fine.
All right. Well, we've been at this for an hour, so I don't know if anyone has any further. Yes, Cynthia still has something she wants to say.
Yeah, one little thing. Just so the idea that I had for the rest of the automation that we are going to come, let's say to update Jira or to update the two modules or do something like that, is one feature. Let me show my screen in here. So I set it up on the release test, is what is called the deployment. So those are very dummy things. So there is that you could click in here, let's say if it's a manual thing, or the good feature about the deployments from Bamboo is that you could have a history, what you deployed, what you didn't deploy it on each one. For example, I have what we call an environment here, and you can see when it was deployed, if it was successful or if it wasn't. And that's usually a very good, instead of adding a lot of states after the release, if it's something that does not do a checkout, there is a very useful tool from Bamboo to have different environments for each kind of piece of deployment, so you can kind of mix and match what exactly you need to deploy for your module. That's it for me.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Derek. This was great.
Yeah, I've got to run to another call, but I want to make sure you understand, Cynthia, how valuable and important this, your contributions have been, and how much we appreciate it. The sun hasn't even come up here, and you've already made my day. So thank you for all the stuff you've been doing for the community.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone, and follow up with any questions on the mailing lists, or on the mailing lists, because I don't think I'm going to go back and look at the Google Plus event page after this. All right. Thanks, everyone, and we will see you in cyberspace.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.